Today we are going to take a deep dive in to the reliability and maintenance of this 2013 Cadillac SRX and find out if it is a buy or if it's a bust. Many years ago, I reviewed the first generation Cadillac SRX. It was a 2006, it had like 180,000 miles, and that one came out as a bust. GM basically changed everything between that first generation and this car. They were actually bigger in the old generation, so it's not even really the same car anymore. They still have the 3.6 underneath the hood on this one, but they offered a bunch of other engines. Really, they're not comparable at all. So we're going to check this one out today. This one has 120,000 miles, which is not terribly high mileage, but they're now old enough where we have enough information about the reliability and stuff where we can really tell you whether or not it's one you should buy or one you should stay away from. Now, before I start listing off the problems here, I just want to make a little disclaimer that you got to stick around to the end of the video, because just because there's some problems with the car, all cars have problems, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bust. But I am going to list out what you want to look for if you're in the market to buy one of these used, and you may take it up into the higher mileage, or you're buying a higher mileage one. So that's the purpose. We want to start out though with the headlights. Headlights on these can be expensive, and they don't have the best seals, so they are prone to get some condensation. Luckily, I haven't had much of an issue on this particular one yet, but if even used, I don't know if they still make them that you can get brand new ones, but the used ones are still very expensive, especially for the higher end headlights. But that's the most common thing sort of on the exterior. As you look around the outside of this, you can see that really paint wears nice, the chrome is all in pretty good shape. No rust on this particular one yet. There's a little bit of surface rust starting, and it is from the Northeast, but we have not seen huge issues with rust or any super common areas of concern that way on these yet. Now, there is a few things on the back end of the SRX here that I want to touch base on. A few things that I've had problems with, some that I haven't, but you might run into. So I did replace one tail light because the LED strip went out on it. So those aren't terribly expensive anymore. You can find them on eBay pretty cheap. The other one that can be a little bit of a hassle is there is side detection for if you have a car next to you. Modules on either side of the bumper. Those have a tendency to get some water in them. There is a service bulletin out about it. If you go to the dealer, it can be fairly expensive, but you can get used parts online, and it's not terrible. I did have that issue. Replaced a module, it was filled with water, and it was all fixed up. So not a big deal. The other one that I've not had any issues with, but other people have mentioned, is the rear gate. As you can see, this rear gate goes up and down just fine, but other people have mentioned that they've had issues with it. Sometimes it's just the button, sometimes it's motor and module. Variety of issues that could pop up there, but this one has worked just fine. Under the hood here, we got the 3.6 liter that GM has been using now for many years. It's their favorite V6 to throw in just about everything. I was really hard on this engine, especially on my previous SRX video, because the timing chain problems for the original SRXs, CTSs, and STSs, all the Cadillacs that had the 3.6, and some of the Malibus and stuff, they had such prevalent timing chain issues. Now, if you change the oil all the time perfectly and never miss anything, they were decently reliable, but they did have a tendency to use oil. So you had to check your oil all the time. And any engine that requires that much, I think, is a flaw, especially when GM went from the 3.8, 3.4, 3.1, all the V6s that they had prior that were pretty much as reliable as could be. Now, yes, when they did the 3.6, it was dual overhead cam and, technically more modern, but back in the day I didn't think it was a great engine. And I still am not necessarily in love with the 3.6, but it does make 308 horsepower, gets 20-ish miles to the gallon average, and they've improved a lot of the timing chain problems. That being said, you still need to look out for them. So some of the early Cadillac SRXs had the 2.8 turbo and the 3-liter turbo. Those ones I would stay away from completely. I would only go with the 3.6. Because those ones had very prevalent timing chain issues. In fact, we have a parts SRX sitting because it had 100,000 miles on it, and timing chain timing chain jumped on it. So if you are looking and in the market for one of these, on a cold start, you want to be up on that side of the engine over there to listen for a timing chain rattle. This car does not have it. I've kept up with synthetic oil changes. It's not an issue on this car. But most common is on cold starts, you'll hear that timing chain rattle. There also could be check engine lights for a variety of things related to the timing chain. So you want to look out for that. Timing chain jobs, I think if you go to a dealer, are about $3,000. So that's one you want to avoid. The rest of the powertrain, I actually really don't have any big issues with. Transmissions are pretty reliable. Not that they're perfect. There's people who've reported issues out there, but largely they're reliable. Sometimes you'll get a vibration, and some people think it's the transmission. A lot of times it's the carrier bearing on the drive shaft if you have an all-wheel drive one. This is an all-wheel drive one, and it has had the drive shaft replaced. Sometimes there's clunking in the rear differential. That is usually just a fluid change. It is a very expensive fluid change, especially if you take it to a dealer, but it's not difficult. It's like 80 bucks a quart for the special fluid, to change the fluid in that, but not overly common, and it's just kind of a routine maintenance thing like changing your oil. The biggest maintenance issue for these is, like I said, changing the oil and also cleaning your throttle body. Sometimes they'll get a rough idle. You want to clean the throttle body. It's not difficult. Just keep up with those maintenance items. Now, this 2013 is a big upgrade over the 2010 to 2012 SRXs because they updated the interior. They kept some of the same, layout and feel, but they upgraded the whole infotainment center to the Cadillac Q system, which we'll talk about in a second. But this still feels very modern to me, even though it is 10 years old, which pains me to say, but it is. Every surface you touch in here with any regularity is a soft surface. There is some hard plastic on the side of your seats or on the door panels, but overall, everything you touch feels really nice. It feels high quality. You can drive it down a bumpy back road. There's no creaks, there's no rattles, nothing like that. And this is 120,000 miles, so some of those things should be coming up if they were going to, but no, it has, a really nice fit and finish, I believe, overall. I've driven some of the BMWs and Mercedes. I feel like it's similar and actually probably wears better than some of those. So all the electronic features inside of here work properly. There's not too much to say. The only things really showing its age is it doesn't have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which obviously it wouldn't. I don't think they were even invented yet. But that's kind of the industry standard nowadays. The other one is the backup camera is fairly grainy. It's not super high def, but you're still not going to hit anything. You can kind of make out what the objects are behind you, and you just got to keep it clean. But those are the only things that I really feel like, you can tell that it's a little bit of an older vehicle at this point. Now, luckily, I have had absolutely no issues with the Q infotainment system at all. None. It's never really froze. It feels, fairly fast as response time. All of those things work pretty well. The biggest issue, though, with these cars, probably that I see across the ATS, any of the Cadillacs that have the Q infotainment system, is the screens go bad. They either crack or they stop responding to touch. It is way too common. But if you watch a YouTube video and buy a screen, it is not a big deal. We have replaced them on a couple different cars now, and it's not that difficult. I think pretty much anybody could do it. It's a little bit involved, but it's not terrible, and it wouldn't scare me away from buying one by any means. It was expensive when people were going to GM to get it fixed, but now that there's so many other screen options on Amazon and eBay, it's not a big deal. This one's not been a problem whatsoever, and still works really well. Now, the one issue, which is kind of an interior, kind of an exterior issue, is this is equipped with the panoramic sunroof, which is beautiful. Mine works perfect. I love it. We don't use it all that often, but it works really well. I'm not even scared to open it. But the drains and the seals on these tend to leak over time, and which can cause you a bunch of problems, because once the humidity and the moisture gets inside the interior, it can cause other electronic issues. But it's fairly easily rectified. You just got to keep your drains clean and make sure that the lines are connected. But so far, no issues with this one, thankfully. Now, I jumped to the back just to show you how much space we have in the rear. Reminder, this is a mid-size SUV. It is not, we're not in an Escalade here, so it's a little bit tighter. But this seat is comfortably where I sit in the front. I'm about 5'8", so I'm not super tall. Keep that in mind. But got plenty of leg room. Headroom is close, so if you are a long torsoed person, you're definitely going to be hitting your head on the ceiling. Seat in the back is okay. It's just okay. A little stiff, feels a little small, but it's a midsize SUV, so it's kind of just what you get. The last thing that we didn't really touch on yet is just driving dynamics. I mean, you know, we put 30,000 miles or something on this car since we have owned it. And I don't own all the vehicles that I do reviews on, but I happen to own this one. So it drives very well, nice. It's great for road trips. Really no complaints with that whatsoever. The only thing I would say is if you've driven the prior SRX, I actually kind of like the way that the prior generation SRX drove better than these. It felt like more its own platform. These feel like they're based off of an Equinox, which is kind of what they are. So now it's time to talk about whether it's a buy or whether it's a bust. I think as far as maintenance and issues, I think it is probably has less issues than the comparable BMW and Mercedes vehicles. I really do. And Audi, any of the German ones. Lexus is probably more reliable. It's Toyota. I mean, you just can't argue with them, but they even have their issues too. Right now, the price on these, we're in the Northeast. I don't know. It's a wide range because it bases, you know, obviously on condition miles. This car is probably a $7,000 to $10,000 car as it sits, depending on retail lot or whatever. That's about right down the line. I would pick this any day, probably over the BMW and the Mercedes. I think it's the better car. I think you're going to have a better experience with ownership. With all luxury cars, there's more maintenance issues, there's more electronics issues, there's more that goes into it. They all have sort of more problems than a standard sort of vehicle. So, so you got to take that into mind that you're buying a luxury vehicle when you're purchasing one of these. And you're going to have a little bit higher cost associated with that. That being said, I think it's a buy. It's not a perfect car, but it served us really, really well. I would buy one again, and you know, overall, we've been really happy with it. Just look out for some of those things that we mentioned. Like I said, if I missed something, please put it in the comments down below. Let me know if you disagree. You think it's the biggest piece of junk ever. I'm good with that. Doesn't bother me. So let me know your thoughts down below. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day.